Hello and welcome back to the One Take Show. In this episode, we are in conversation with Ms. Sandhya Surendran. Ma'am is a senior legal counsel for Asia Pacific region in Vice Media. She has previously worked as a media entertainment lawyer working with individual artists and various organizations. And she also hosts a wonderful podcast called Lex Talk Music, and have linked the podcast down in the description. So please make sure to check out this podcast. In this episode, we talk about what is media entertainment law, what is the legal practice in this industry, what are the practical aspects of this legal practice, and how can we familiarize ourselves with the various laws that have an interplay in media entertainment law, and how can we create our niche in this industry. Ma'am shares her experience, ma'am shares her interpretations, and this is one of the finest conversations that I've had. If you like this episode, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions or feedbacks, write them down in the comment section. I would love to read them. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump right in. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the One Take Show. I am so excited to have this conversation. I am honestly a fan of your podcast, Lex Talk Music, and I have followed your work. I have realized that there is an entire industry that law students do not necessarily talk about much, that you have an expertise in, and you can definitely give us so much to learn about, so much to learn from. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time off your really busy schedule and sitting down with me for this conversation.
Thank you, Kaustubh. I know we've taken some time to get here, but I'm glad that we finally did. So, I mean, I feel very old and very important that you're giving me all these, kind words and introducing me. But yeah, it's been a very interesting journey in this career and this, this practice that I've been in the last 6 years. So, thank you for having me, and thank you for taking time out to bring me here.
Ma'am, it's an honor, honestly. And as much as I believe that this conversation is important, when I was researching about this episode, I was researching on your profile, I've realized that you've had a very interesting journey, starting from a corporate law firm, moving to in-house, and then moving towards media entertainment industry. I think one of the major questions that come here for any law student who would want to learn from your experiences, when you make those transitions and you've made them, what were your major takeaways from that experience? What was that transition like, and why did you make that transition?
So I think any law student, especially in their final year, will vouch for this, going through campus recruitment. I think this is the time also, right?
Yeah.
So you just take the first job that comes your way, right? You have like all these grand plans when you're in law school. And if I tell you the reason why I joined law school also, it's quite funny, because I decided I wanted to become a lawyer when I was 9. Because yeah, and it was interesting reason behind it was that I wanted to solve crime. I realized being a detective wasn't really, a fancy job title, but a lawyer had a little more weight than a detective. So that's how the idea started. But I think what is important is that by the time, so I decided to become a criminal lawyer, and that's why I joined law school. And I think my first internship at Patiala House, which was a 6-week internship, changed my mind. It's kind of scarred me also emotionally. I realized, okay, I'm not cut out for this.
Okay.
This is not my scene at all. So I said, okay, I need to like think about, this, peddling with my conscience, but maybe I don't think criminal law is cut out for me. But that said, I should admit that I'm still very intrigued by criminal law. So like I follow a lot of, crime stories, and I love, binging on all these serial killer and the true story ones. And we don't really need any of these horror movies when we have all of those. But to cut the long story short, I think what happened was, like, over the course of 5 years, I kind of realized that there were a few things that I was really good at and that I really liked. Intellectual property was actually one of them. But like I said, during your campus recruitment, when you get placed with the best law firm in the country, you're not going to say no. I mean, of course, you've interviewed with them. You want the same job that the topper in the class is, been hired for. So I think so that was in 2007. It was like 14 years ago. And that's how the whole corporate law journey started. So I didn't really plan for any of it, to be honest. I didn't really plan to like become like a media entertainment lawyer or get into tech. I knew that I was always interested in IP. I kind of followed that even through law school. Um, because I mean, it was interesting. These are things that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, right? Like it's pop culture mixed with law. So why wouldn't it be interesting? And I think I must have spent like a little lesser than 2 years at in Bombay at the law firm, because I couldn't handle it. It wasn't. I'm not saying that it was a bad experience, but it wasn't meant for me. Like a lot of people have like thrived in that environment, and that's great because it's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of like uh distress more than anything else, but it pays off, I think, over a period of years. And I think when I moved in-house, that was to Infosys in 2000, end of 2008 is when I like interviewed with them. I had already interned with them, so I knew the kind of work they did, and I liked Bangalore as a city, so it just made sense for me to, kind of make that shift. And honestly, I think the big, I think, push was there was a crash. There was an economic crash that happened in 2008. I don't know if you remember, when Lehman Brothers shut down, and like we lost a ton of work that time. So I think we were also like they were also like debating kind of reassigning the people who were working in the team that I was in, and I wasn't very keen on being a part of that reassignment. So that's how the whole okay, let me look out for something else, and the move to Bangalore happened. And that was a great decision, honestly speaking, because it wasn't it- you're so much younger that time, and you're just thinking more with your heart than your head, no? So these are all impulsive decisions that you're like, I'm leaving because I can't handle this, and I'm done, and I don't want to deal with this whole economic crisis, so I'll move in-house, and it's a safer bet. And I spent 3 years at Infosys, and it was a I think my learning curve was pretty intense there, because there was so much that we had to like do on our own, and it was a big team, and but the volume of work that came in was also significant. And it is commercial transactions, like pure for sure commercial transactions, end to end contracting, your NDAs, so all, I think, the basics of how to get a contract done. And when you're working with a large IT company like Infosys, where contracts are like the base of almost all your transactions there. So I think it was, I mean, again, like I said, I don't think I'd ever regret any of the places that I've worked with and the experiences that I've gone through, because they have all kind of led to where I am today. So, and but then, like, I think at the end of 3 years, doing only contracts kind of got monotonous for me. And I realized that I wanted to stick to technology, because I mean, I'm curious about tech in general. I really like technology. I follow, current affairs when it's like related to tech and music, of course. That, I mean, that's a given. That just goes without saying. But I never really thought that I would do something in music. So it was like a happy surprise when I finally did. And the move to InMobi was also such a great, like I think everything happens for a reason, because from a very specific structured environment which was focusing only on commercial transactions and contracts, I moved to a startup environment where people wear like shorts and jeans, and like a corporate lawyer is not used to all of that. You're just like, what is this culture like? This is not where I'm coming from. So it was great, actually. I mean, apart from that initial like, oh, can I wear jeans to office kind of vibe, it was just, I think, my growth rate was like, it just like kind of peaked, it, because I had to do everything by myself. So when I joined the company, I was technically the first legal hire. The general counsel at that point of time was working as an external consultant, and then he kind of joined in, and we pretty much like built up that team, and we had like other senior resources join like over a period of time. And it was such a new industry. Like mobile ad tech in 2012 was still kind of picking up. I mean, smartphones weren't as rampant as they are today. Like, you still I mean, we didn't like rely on WhatsApp and Dunzo and Swiggy for everything. It was just like we still did have a life outside the phone. So I think it was a good time to join them because the industry was very new. So there was a lot of learning over there. And because I like tech, it just added to that, fascination to understanding how the company worked and the kind of business it was going into. And it evolved like over a period of 5 years. A company like InMobi, given the industry that it is in, it wasn't just about mobile ad tech. It evolved from ad tech to data to artificial intelligence. So there's so many new things that it kind of brought into the my career dynamic as such. And I think that really helped me kind of build like a niche interest in these specific areas like tech and media specifically. And because it was also an advertising in movie. And I think but then like I think all of us kind of hit a plateau at some point where you just you're just staring at your laptop at like 11 in the night and wondering, what am I doing with my life? Like, who am I doing this for? So then, and I had this moment of epiphany actually right after an accident, and it gave me some time to think. And I was just like, okay, I told my parents, I was like, I kind of want to do something on my own, and I'm not going to, I don't want to do a 9 to 5. So this was in 2016. And I decided that I will do something in music. Now, what the something was, even I didn't know. I had grand plans of actually becoming a musician, but I think within like 3 months, I realized that it was not a skill set that you just like decide one fine day you can become a musician. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it. And but what I realized was that there weren't any lawyers in the music industry in India. There was nobody. And I'm talking about the ground reality. I'm not talking about the law firms, which are like full service law firms who have media and entertainment and IP lawyers. And they work with big names. They work with your record labels like a T Series or a Sony, or those guys have their own in-house legal teams as well. I'm talking about actual groundwork, like people who work with, you know, musicians who are professional musicians, who are sessions artists, who are singers, who are indie artists. I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like the A.R. Rahmans of the world, but and I realized that people were coming to me asking, saying, "Hey, aren't you a lawyer? So do you understand about this? Like, can you explain, what this means?" And I got this contract. And is it okay if I just sign it without anybody looking at it? And it started. It slowly picked up. It took its own time, but I think by late 2000, I think by late 2017, people were really curious. They were just like, there is so much of information that you have which you can share, and it's information that you take for granted. And that's when I realized that, okay, it's a big opportunity more than anything else. I, in fact, got a lot of flack for sharing free information. I mean, I had people like reaching out to me saying, dude, this is stuff that we get paid like at least like 50,000 bucks to give. Why are you giving it out for free? And I was just like, because we need this. You don't realize what is the next step. This is opening up an entire sector of work, like, I mean, you can't expect individual artists to like pay you the way a large record label pays you. But it is a need. It is, I think, and I think people are slowly understanding the need for having lawyers in this space as well. But the problem with this is that it's not a revenue generating industry. As in, if you're going to rely on only music, then you might not necessarily be very happy with the returns, because it's not something that, yeah, it's not like, I mean, I'm saying daily ongoing legal support is something that most indie artists cannot afford. So how do we kind of counter that? So you kind of need to like have a balance between both your, working with indie artists and kind of providing them with like nominally charged services, as opposed to working with like a large corporate and having like a good retainer with them. So I kind of had both. And then of course 2020 happened. And everything just came to a grand end. So I think this is like every freelancer story is the same. And it was those 5 years that I've spent building Lexic and working on the podcast was that. I mean, that kind of still continues in the sense, like, especially through the podcast. And I still have people like giving me a call and saying, can you advise me on this? And can you throw some light on what are these terms? Like, what is mechanical rights? What are performance royalties? And there's so much of information that's available, but it's so difficult to like segregate through it and kind of make sense, that I realized that this is a massive opportunity. But then to kind of ramp up on that opportunity, you need infrastructure. There has to be a lot more awareness building. So I still hope that someday I can get back to it. But 2020 kind of put me in a spot, and I want to continue associating myself with artists and like especially with musicians, and I still do, and with the podcast especially. But then when I realized that I need to kind of like strike a balance, and you do need to look after yourself as well. And then when the whole opportunity with Vice came up, I did not want to like let it go. So that, and I've been with them for the past few months now, and that's also like, of course, in the media and entertainment business, and there's like it's a whole different kind of a experience. But it's everything has been like, there's just so much learning every day, and I still feel like a fresher from 14 years ago, because it's just like there's so much more to learn and there's so much more to understand. So yeah, I think
Right.
I think I rambled a little bit, but yeah.
No, I actually got stuck at a point when you mentioned the plateau, and I couldn't help but notice that 2020, I think that plateau has been accelerated. All of the law students are just staring at their laptops, wondering why the hell are they doing whatever they're doing right now. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, with respect to your experience, there's one thing very remarkable, that the fact that there has been a need identification is something that is very fascinating to me. I think I was recently researching something on copyright communities and how the artists are associated with it, and what kind of benefits or the losses or the disadvantages or the advantages are accrued. I've realized that there is definitely a need, if and the need is to be identified. And this is not something which is perhaps talked about as much as we talk about, let's say, arbitration, or we talk about insolvency, or some of those more other in vogue areas of laws at this moment. But when you now working as a senior legal counsel for Vice Media Asia Pacific, and now you handling all those latest matters, specifically working in media entertainment industry, if I were to ask you, what and how would you conceptually describe media uh, industry and the legal practice, especially in media entertainment industry, what would your interpretation be?
So the thing is, Kaustubh, I think media and entertainment is, in terms of laws, comprises of everything, because you have, starting from your intellectual property is at the core. You have commercial transactions, contracting. You do have corporate laws that apply to the industry I'm talking about, because these are the clients that you're dealing with, right? You, in terms of laws that specifically apply to the business of media entertainment, it's your censorship, your IP. You have your latest IT guidelines which talk about the code of ethics, which has just kind of like ambushed everybody in the industry. And a lot of, and then of course you have the corporate side of things, like you'll have the FDI regulations, or you'll have the RBI constraints, which will apply to the operations of how these companies in this industry works. But um, apart from that, I think your core basics would be with IP, censorship, contracts, and like I said, now the new social media intermediary guidelines. So those are, I think, at which will probably be at the core of your practice areas. And I think, yeah, operationally speaking, I'm talking about like business and operation wise, but not from a corporate standpoint. Anything that would apply to any other company would apply to a media entertainment company. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does actually. And that actually gives me an opportunity to ask you a rather basic question with full naivety that you would expect from a law student is that when someone who's trying to understand this industry and trying to perhaps work their way to establish a practice in this industry, what are those essential features of a legal practice in media industry that we should particularly take care of? One that I can clearly identify from your previous answers is that we need to be very good with IPR. Intellectual property rights is something that we need to perhaps specialize in order to work in this industry. What are the other such characteristics that we need to take care of?
Okay. Disclaimer right up front. I don't have a specialization in IPR. I was just interested in it. So
Okay.
I don't, honestly, I mean, degrees and like higher studies and LLMs and qualifications, I've realized are not as important as your actual interest in the subject. You know, and I think what is severely lacking, what I've understood is, especially in a unorganized, like, I wouldn't want to say disorganized. I just say it's like it doesn't. It's not a. It's not an organized industry like tech, right? Media and entertainment is just like all over the place. Like we don't really have like too many rules and regulations and structures in place. A lot of people work off on like oral, promises and word of mouth, and like they take it for granted that you don't need a contract to actually establish like a problem. So we have it's something as basic as that. um so I think having context to the industry also helps a lawyer a lot. So what worked really well for me and continues to work well for me is the context that I have. So I'm married to a musician, and I have been working in the music industry not just as a lawyer but also as an artist manager. So the kind of context that I had to how the industry works and to what are the pain points that most artists kind of like go through is a very different kind of a perspective. So it's not, I'm not just looking at it only from, okay, the law says XYZ and we can do XYZ. It's just the law says this. How do we work with it to kind of establish what we want? So setting context is very, very key. And when I've worked with artists, when I've represented them, I've had like other lawyers on the other side who are representing either another artist or another company or a label who have zero context to how the industry works. And then it makes things so much more difficult because not understanding how the industry is placed and how these um, processes kind of fit in, and then kind of sticking to only the legal point of view will not get your client the results they want, and it will not close a deal. And you can be very, you can, so there are two ways to it. You can either act like you're completely ignorant of the law and just put whatever you want in the deal and in the contract, or you can understand what the regulations and the laws actually provide for, apply it in the context of your artist and the situation that he or she is actually entering into, and then negotiate a good solid contract which is balanced. But the problem with most, I think it's like a general, it's kind of like a, I wouldn't really say it's an Indian thing, but I realize it's a very corporate thing that you have contracts which are totally one-sided. And in India, it goes one step further, especially in the music industry, that they will have contracts which are not just one sided, but which are against the law also. So they'll have like, clauses which say you will waive all your rights, you will waive your moral rights, you will waive your rights to receive royalties, and artists agree to it because they don't know better.
Yeah.
And lawyers who are working on this don't really they I have received this argument that but this is industry practice, but industry practice does not mean the right practice. So how do you go about changing it? So I'm saying, and this is very specific to media and entertainment. It's not like tech or more organized sectors where you do have uh, policies and frameworks in place, where you have like self-regulating bodies that kind of come out with guidelines that companies are who are associated who are working in the industry kind of follow. That doesn't work like that with media and entertainment.
Yeah.
So I think so context and having a genuine interest in the matter, in the subject, I think is very, very important. And it's
Right.
not just about it being
Mhm.
like I had someone ask me this, that it's so cool to be an entertainment lawyer, to work with the music industry. I was just like, yeah, honestly, even I thought it was so cool, but it's very stressful also. Because you're not dealing with businesses, you're dealing with people.
Mhm.
You're dealing with people, so how you understand them, how you
Mhm.
work with them. So that is my third point. You need to be somebody who knows how to talk to people, who knows how to communicate. Your communication skills are very, very important. So much more than in any other sector. Because this is not just about creating an impression, but it's about building trust with your client.
Right.
So
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean, I had some template questions ready when I was going to ask you about your practical experience of working as a lawyer in media industry. I think I'm going to deviate now because this conversation has just become very, very interesting. So when you talk about your experience as an artist manager, and then
Mm.
also as a lawyer who understands everything, who observes everything, who has a very clear idea as to how law works, and observes everything as to how the other lawyers, other parties are behaving, how they are negotiating. I think that entire problem of over negotiating or perhaps creating a win and lose situation is embedded in our psychology. Even in law schools, we have that in our negotiation competitions. We just want to win, completely
Yeah.
destroy the other
Yeah.
party. But I think when we talk from that one very interesting perspective, what are the major challenges that you face? Well, like one that I understand is that facing people, may it be artists, other companies, other officials, lawyers, that requires a lot of people skills. But apart from
Mm.
that, like being an artist manager, being a lawyer working in that industry, what are the major challenges that you come across?
So, like I mentioned earlier, the industry itself is not organized. So, most lawyers, especially coming from the kind of background that I came from, I'm used to things being organized and, emails being sent and acknowledging emails and, expecting people to like respect your personal time off and not message you on a Saturday night at 11. All of that will go out of the window, so you can forget about it. And you don't even like and for me that was like a massive culture shock. I'm just like, how can they not acknowledge my call? How can they not reply to my email? I was like, what is this? Like, people don't have contracts here. Like, I was just mind blown. But then once so in I realized that those are all opportunities. Because when I started treating my clients in the media and the entertainment industry the same way that I treated my tech clients, they are very impressed with it, because of course professionalism works well. So there are people, and I've realized you it's about that drawing that balance, right? You don't need to overcomplicate things. Just because you've been hired to do a job as a lawyer does not mean you write like pedantic long 10-page essays and make a contract of 50 pages which can be done in 4. But the logic that I have received is, but we want to be very sure, we want to be very thorough, and 90% of those things which are there in the contract don't need to be there. So a lawyer convincing another lawyer that your contract is too long is also a little, because of course the ego also comes in, and then they just like, please, I'm part of this law firm, so I know what I'm doing, kind of thing. But it's not really going to get you your deal closed. So that is something which I kind of came across. And like I said, that lack of context and explaining how the industry works to another lawyer who's working on the same deal but on the other side is time consuming. And what is the worst part is people who are from the industry and not lawyers, non-lawyers, who are so convinced that what they know is right because they've been in the industry for that many years, convincing them that they're wrong. That is, it's just like, I'm just like, see, listen, I know you've been in the industry for 30 years, but we've not been doing it right the last 10 years because we've had a lot of changes, and there are these industry practices which need to change because internet and technology and streaming, so things work very differently. So that has also been quite a bit of a challenge. So I think, but these are all things that kind of will change over a period of time. But apart from that, I don't think I've really faced any specific concern, uh, up, which is very, I don't know, like narrowed down to like the music industry or the media entertainment industry. These are all like very generic. You'll have like the same array laws are so complicated. People are complaining about why is this Copyright Act so complicated? Why can't they just write it seedha in like normal English? But I'm just like, then lawyers won't have a job, no? So, so yeah.
By the way, to all the listeners of this podcast who can't watch this video, I'm laughing. It's just thankful that I can mute myself because then there will be an audio feedback. But this is very, very fascinating. No wonder why people think your job is really cool, working in media and entertainment industry. Want to learn more and more about it. But this is very fascinating, and I want to know what happens when things go bad in contracts, in negotiations, or perhaps the deals that have been done. What happens when there is a point of dispute resolution, litigation? How does media industry deal with dispute resolution, or let's say litigation? Is it just as amicable as it works out? And when I say amicable, I mean the set rules that already govern the way the dispute is supposed to be resolved. Does that work the similar way in music industry, and how do lawyers adopt to that?
So again, I don't think there's no right answer to this, because it's like, since it's not, these aren't just businesses that we're dealing with, you're dealing with people. So it's as personal as it gets. So a dispute means you're dealing with personal emotions as well. So how you handle your client is going to have a huge impact on the ultimate, what really happens to the dispute. So it could, if you are someone who is an aggressive lawyer who wants to, who'll say, no, you should fight back and you should do this and you should, file a case and all of that, you need to kind of keep your own ego aside to, uh, you know, evaluate the situation, because we understand that our courts and the legislative system is clogged. So an additional lawsuit for your lawyer, for your client, might mean more money for you. But it really, I feel it's like breaching your client's trust, because you're not acting on in their best interests. And I have come across lawyers like that who have very categorically told me that I don't make money out of, not I, that person has told me that, that they don't make money out of a mediation or a dispute settlement discussion. They make money out of the situation reaching court. And then they'll charge like a fixed fee, and then they'll take a percentage of whatever they make, because most of these will end up having some amount of damages in it. So in at least with the clientele that I have worked with, I have always, except for like one or two cases which kind of ended up finally in court, everything has been about, let's discuss this out of court, because it's about massaging egos at the end of the day and kind of drawing, again, balance is everything. And I realized that um, you shouldn't get really riled up on behalf of your client. You need to be the rational voice, because the client might have a manager also, or they might have like other parties interested in them, because depending on who the client is, whether it's whether it's like a musician or like actor, or people who are in public view. So there's a lot of I think equations that we need to like kind of assess before you advise them. So you're not just looking at it from a purely court litigation perspective, but you're also looking at it from how does this impact your client's career. This is very different from advising a company on a litigation or a dispute, because there you have insurance which will take care of costs. It is not personal at all. it is going to be, unless it's like a criminal investigation on a director or somebody that something has happened. I'm talking about like overall, like, when you're working with a corporate and you're representing a corporate. Apart from a person who's representing the corporate, like from the corporate side, it's not personal at all. But in the entertainment industry, almost like 90% of it, unless it's like between two entities, between two companies, most of it is going to be like an individual to individual kind of dispute. So then how do you make things better for your client? It's not just about sending them to court, but there are some of course some instances which need to be battled out in court, because it is reached a stage where you need that kind of intervention, and then you advise them and tell them, be financially prepared, be emotionally prepared for that length, for that duration that you will have to spend, because that's like a few good years of your life gone just like running behind courts. But I mean, and ultimately it is their decision and you need to respect it, but you play a very very important part, because you're a counsel to them, and that is the role that I have played with my clients. It's not just about I'll review your contract and send you off. So they will call me saying, I have a problem with this because I have worked with this particular person and they have gone ahead with my music and used it somewhere else. How do I go about this? So is it straight away file a case, or is it reach out to them, talk to them, figure out how we can resolve this, figure out how you can be credited, how you can be provided with adequate compensation for them using your work? Or if that doesn't work, then we send a cease and desist, and take things accordingly, and not just like hit full throttle right in the beginning. So yeah.
Right, right. I think this is very fascinating, especially when we look at it from one perspective of understanding how this entire process works, especially when it comes to a pragmatic, real life interpretation of the same. I think what is really important, what I understand from your answer, is there is an indispensable need of commercial awareness. There's an indispensable need for a pragmatic understanding of how this is actually going to play out and whether this at all interests my client, who is perhaps not a huge corporation. I think with my last couple of set of questions, the major one would be that now that you have such a significant position in a company, and now that you're working specifically for the media industry pertaining to a particular company, and then you've also worked previously with individual artists, this entire industry, especially with respect to the legal practice, how do you see this evolving? The major challenges that it faces, legal challenges, or perhaps, or the possibilities that we can perhaps hope for or try and exploit?
um from an Indian perspective especially, I think our biggest hurdles have been how vague our laws are and how they're interpreted. So I think it is about understanding the implications of non-compliance and kind of working your way around that. Because it's not that technically, as a media and entertainment professional or a company in this country, we can do anything. I mean, because we know how enforcement works, and it also depends on how visible you are. So all of those things matter in this field. It's not like a plain vanilla IT services company where you're just working in the background and you have your business and you file your taxes and that's it, right? Media and entertainment is in public view, so you're visible on a daily basis. So so you kind of need to like draw parallels between what are the things that you should be worrying about in terms of compliance, these are non-negotiable, and what are the things that you can like work around with. And in India, our problem has always been about how loosely worded a law has been, and the like almost like so many notifications and clarifications that are issued, and then kind of kind of plugging them, putting them together and make it, because it's like a puzzle piece. And you have one regulation which is like maybe a corporate regulation which will have an impact on your operational, your business activities. So how do you loop all of this in? So have it's not so, which is why I'm saying we can't really work in silos. You need to have like a overall 30,000 feet picture about your laws as such. And that is the beauty of the media and entertainment industry. So it's a good thing and a bad thing, because that means there's that much more work. You can't really say that, oh, I am a contracts lawyer and that's it. You need to
Right,
know all of these things.
right.
So And I think how it's going to keep evolving is that,
Mm-hmm.
again, I feel the kind of technology that is, building up now, which is impacting every sector, has also brought the need for laws to be globally acceptable. So I can't have varying degrees of data privacy applied to me. So as a global company, and almost all large entities, corporates, are either aiming at becoming global companies or have global operations, which means the kind of compliances that they have are also going to be kind of like, it'll be benchmarked at some point. So I feel that it for an industry like media and entertainment, there is a lot of sensitivity too, because you have censorship that applies to it. You have um like all your standard tort laws that apply to the kind of content that you have out there. So it'll be impossible to keep a global industry standard for it. But in terms of, say, free speech and those kind of things, all of that are more or less uniform. Then how do you deal with it in a country like India, where you are constantly battling something like that every day, where politics determines so many of these factors? So those are all things which are evolving. Maybe 10 years from now, things might be very different. We might either go back like 50 years, like we might be beyond regressive, or we might, like, move past the kind of hurdles that we're facing today and not be worried about, like, what is the content that is being put out there. And just you just need to like focus on your actual core IP laws and all of that. um
Mm-hmm.
but I'm hoping that things will keep evolving for the better and not, like, regressing. And yeah.
Right. I think that's a constant hope, to be honest. Having
Mm.
anywhere, like, I truly believe that all those new notifications or new regulations have a very different taste. There are various
Yeah.
opinions, and obviously, I don't think this is the appropriate platform for me to voice my opinions out. But there have been very, very stark, very polarizing opinions about how, let's say, an OTT platform should function, how music platform should
Mm.
function, what exactly is the music platform can really broadcast, and then there are
Mm.
rights, liabilities that are in issues. But I think with that, it is time that I really bring up a conversation about something that been wanting to have a conversation about, your podcast. Let's Talk Music is about 11 episodes now. The last episode that
Yeah.
I tuned in was with Mr. Banerjee. You were talking about some really
Yeah.
interesting stuff.
Nice. Yeah.
So first, like, just a couple of questions about podcasting. Is one, why did you choose podcasting? As in, what are the conceptual benefits or the idea that you draw from podcasting?
Mm.
And secondly, what was your experience with the podcast?
So I think my life is like filled with happy coincidences. And the podcast is also something like that. So
Okay.
I realized that I had done this video. Basically, I had like done these 20-minute videos on contracts. And I realized that, the might as well, like, how do I do this on a regular basis? Because every time someone comes to me with a question on something very, very basic, like, concepts of copyright, or like explaining how it works in the music industry, I have to keep repeating myself. So then I just thought to myself, if I can do this for video, how else do I like record and keep all of this somewhere which can be accessed by people? And that's when the whole podcast idea struck me. So it wasn't with the intent. It was more like I know it sounds really crude that I'm saying this, but it was more like a dumping ground of all information that was accumulated in my head so that I don't forget it. So I think that was like that's how it kind of started. And then I and like I said, I'm very tech savvy, so I like doing all of this, like, discovering new platforms and all these services. And I checked out all the podcast services, subscription services that were there. I found Buzzsprout, and then just decided. Then I annoyed my husband into making a theme for me for the podcast, because those are all the important bits, like the exciting parts. And I said, okay, let me just start. So it was just like one fine day I woke up and I said, okay, I think today I'm going to like record something, and I'll maybe make a podcast out of it. And then that's pretty much what happened. So after the first two episodes, I listened to myself and I was just like, nobody's going to want to listen to this one person going on talking, like rambling about copyright. Like, who is this person? Keep quiet. So then I said, okay, let me bring somebody else and we'll talk about copyright. And that's how the episode with Priyanka Kimani came about. And I'd met Priyanka once and I was just like, I'm texted her and I said, you know what, like, would you be interested in like doing this? She's like, of course, yeah, why not? And she's like, I think we need more of these conversations because there's very little information out there. And that was, I think, that kind of helped me push the podcast ahead because I realized we really don't have any reliable source of information regarding the music industry and the business and the legal aspects of it anywhere. So even if you Google it or if you look at like a material that's there, now when I look at the material that is there, I'm just like, these are articles written by me only. Like, what is this? Where are the other experts? So I was just like, okay, can we try changing that? Like, I want to like put more information out there. If not, at least make these episodes conversation starters, like have people listen to that and think, okay, what is that? What is they talking about? Let me go read up on it. Or, oh, am I supposed to do this? And my aim was to simplify it and make the people who it really impacts get hooked onto it and listen to it and actually keep track. So indie artists, artist managers, indie record labels, because obviously the big ones don't really need my support, they have their own in-house teams. And anybody who's like in the music industry basically and interested and wants to understand, including lawyers, because like I said, context is key. So then I realized that that format worked really well. 1 hour just flew, and there was so much of information that we were sharing and so much of information that I was getting from the person that I was interviewing. Then I kind of made a plan in my head that, okay, I will interview different people from across the industry. I've not been very regular, I know, because it's just like every 2 months I'll wake up and I'll say, okay, I will do an episode this month. But there are two more episodes coming. I've already recorded them. I just need to like sit down and kind of edit it and kind of, publish. So, and that's going to be on artist management and music publishing, which nobody knows anything about in the country right now. So I'm very excited about it myself. But thank you. It means a lot that you actually like the podcast and it makes sense to you. So
no, it absolutely does. And I have very particular reasons why I love this podcast. So I had a very interesting conversation with Miss Namrata Pahwa about fashion law, and we were having a conversation about the rights of the designers, the human rights of the models or the manufacturers, and other ancillary rights. And then I realized that, and as I started researching for this episode, I realized that when I started listening to your podcast, for example, you talk about performance royalties, or you have a conversation about those mechanical rights that you talk about. So as someone who tries to upload something on YouTube, very basic example here, that I do not have any idea as to how YouTube copyright laws work or their rules work, and if there is to be a copyright infringement, what exactly am I supposed to do? And these are the questions that do not necessarily require me to approach a legal counsel. Obviously I can research on it because I'm a law student. I have some hint as to how I can research on it. But someone who has no idea, who is an indie artist, who simply is growing with their product, who's just manufacturing their content, would definitely like to know more about their rights, more about their duties, the obligations, and everything that goes behind the scene. And as you said, dumping information is technically the entire podcasting industry. As meta this conversation gets exploitation of the media industry to help the media industry. But
yeah.
I truly loved your 11th episode, to say the least. I think obviously Priyanka ma'am's episode was amazing, but your latest episode is something that I listened to the lens also to understand how I can get better and make my podcast more conducive to that. But yes, as I've said, the idea of Lex Talk Music is exactly what I think every law student or legal aspirant needs as of this moment, and something that I am trying to do with this podcast is to have conversations about things that we can exploit. It is all about exploitation. So yes,
yes, opportunities. Yes. Let's be diplomatic about it. But
yeah. So again, I absolutely love your podcast, ma'am. And as far as this conversation is concerned, everything about this conversation is absolutely gold. every part of this conversation is something that I genuinely wanted to have, indispensable part of this podcast. And I'm really grateful that you actually spared an hour of your time, sit down with me and
No
have this conversation. Before we wrap this up, do you have any closing remarks for our viewers, our listeners?
If you're a lawyer and if you're an aspiring lawyer, as in if you're not yet joined law school, think really carefully whether you want to do it, because it's like 5 years of reading so much. But I think, but to like everyone who's like tuning in and like, I know it's not necessarily professional advice, or it's just, I think we all need to be like kinder to ourselves. And that's something which I've like kind of figured out in the last 6 years. And it's affected me both from a professional and personal perspective, like to give yourself time, allow yourself to grow, allow yourself to discover things. So it's okay if you haven't done something which you had planned to like 5 years ago. Maybe there's something else that you might be inclined to do, and maybe you'll do a better job at that. And because I had all these plans in my head, and when I started off, when I wanted to become a lawyer, when I joined law school, when I graduated law school, and I've come a very, very long way from there, and very, very different long way. So I think allow yourself to change and just be okay with it. I think more importantly, and I don't know, like if you're looking at, and from a professional perspective, if you're looking at getting into like media and entertainment law, don't do it because you think it's cool. Do it because you really like the whole, the that you're interested in IP, that you understand you need to have your basics in IP very, very solid. And have, if you have like an interest in understanding the industry better and setting that context right, nothing like it.
Perfect. Perfect. Don't join this industry if you think it is cool. Join it if you enjoy the grind of this industry. Perfect. I just
Yeah,
found the
yeah,
caption of this
yeah.
episode. Right.
Yeah.
With that, thank you so
Okay.
much, ma'am. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I had a wonderful time speaking with you. I hope you had a good time too.
Likewise, Kaustubh. Thank you for taking time out, and thank you for being persistent. That really, it matters a lot. And
Right.
please stay safe. And
Mhm.
I hope we are all able to
Mhm.
like meet in person someday, and
Absolutely.
that this situation improves. All the best.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
All right.